almost as a kid, and I went to Israel a few times to visit relatives, and I could never make it taste how I wanted to at home. And it's just a few ingredients. You know, it's garbanzo beans, tahini, salt, lemon, and a little bit of garlic. It just was not what I wanted it to be. And I tried for years. There's a Smitten Kitchen recipe where she tells you to take every peel off of every garbanzo bean. Oof. I did it.
Wow.
I was just so, what's that?
We did that.
You did it? Did it work?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay, see, I didn't get the results I wanted even then, and I tried all these recipes. Then I was here for an event. I think it was maybe an unorthodox live show, and then there was catering afterwards, and I took one bite of that hummus, which I just kind of put on my plate, and I thought, whatever, I have to eat this. And it was like, the light came on, and it was the hummus that I've been chasing the dragon over all these years. And I ran around and I found Pamela, and I was like, who made this? And she said, it's a man named Eli Lahav. And she gave me his phone number, and I called him, and I said, can I come to your house? Will you teach me how to make this hummus? And he was like, it's just hummus. Why do I come? There's nothing. And I was like, let me come over. So he let me come over, and I learned that day. And then I also learned a lesson from the owner of Aviv, that really, really delicious hummuseria in Capitol Hill. Yeah. Yes, where I learned that it's the tahini. You need to have really good tahini, and you need to use a lot of it. Because if you look at recipes online, it's often 2 tablespoons, 3 tablespoons.
And then it just tastes like chickpeas, and it's all thick. And
it's not enough, and you need all of that tahini. So I think my recipe, I might be forgetting. I think I might call for a half a cup for a can of chickpeas, or 2/3 of a cup. And I started ordering tahina from Israel. And then I learned about Zoom. So the quality of the tahini really, really, really matters.
I actually wanted to ask you about that, because how can you judge the quality of tahini, either before you buy it, or if you have one tucked back from long ago in your cupboard? You know, what are the signs to you after all this recipe testing that it's up to muster?
Yeah, it's hard because I've learned what to look for, but it doesn't say it on any of the bottles. So the reason that Palestinian and Israeli tahini tends to be very good is they tend to use sesame seeds from the Humera region of Ethiopia, which is considered to be where the best sesame seeds in the world are grown. I've never seen that written on a bottle, ever. Yeah, there's all kinds of things. Like, it sounds so basic, but I always check the expiration date now, because when I was making this book, I was going to all kinds of stores and buying tahini, and so they would often be expired, and they'd be so clumpy, and they'd be like clay. So that is a piece of advice. But I actually just took all of the tahinis that I liked, and I went to their websites, and sometimes it was a lot of digging, and I found that every brand I like, which I list at the beginning of the book, is from Palestine or Israel. So it might just be my taste, what I'm used to and what I like, but I just advise people to go and buy a bunch of brands and just see what you like. It's kind of fun to do a tasting with your friends, like a blind tasting, which when I was on Tom Douglas's radio show promoting the book in November, we did that. We got a whole bunch, put them in paper bags, and Zoom, I think, came out on top. And the ones that I didn't like, everybody didn't like. And I was like, it's not just me. So, yeah. But you have to do a little research. Actually, you don't, because I share mine in the book. So, yeah, I've done it for you.
Perfect. Let's talk about your journey into creating this book, because I think a lot of people in this room or watching online know you from your reporter life, your podcast life, your media life. But how did you get to this cookbook deal? Why Sesame Seeds, and why this book?
Yeah, so my story is a story of why you should leave the house. Thank you for being here today in person. I think, with getting to work at home, or having the choice to work at home or go in the office, a lot of us stay home. I'm guilty of this now myself. But the way I got this book deal was because I left my house. So I was working at Cairo Radio at the time. I worked there for many, many years. And when the pandemic started, just like everyone, we stopped having guests in the building. So for 2 years, I did all of my interviews over Zoom. And then finally, we decided that we could have guests back in again. And I happened to have the publisher of Sasquatch Books, based in Seattle, come in for a story I was doing. She came in, we hit it off immediately. We talked for like 20 or 30 minutes before I even turned the mic on. And I hear a lot of people saying that it's hard to make friends as an adult, but I have a patented method that is very kindergarten. before she left, I looked at her and I said, do you want to be my friend?
I love this.
And it worked, and she became my friend. And if we had done this interview on Zoom like I'd been doing for 2 years, she would have come in, we would have said hello, done the interview, gotten off, nothing would have come from it. But 3 months later, she sent me a message and said, I just heard your Let's Meal episode all about tahini. You seem freakishly passionate about it, and you have a lot of opinions. We've been thinking about doing a Sesame tahini cookbook. Do you want to write the proposal? I was like, yes, I do. I'd wanted to write a book since I was 4 years old. So I wrote the proposal, and then I got a book deal because of talking to someone in real life.
I love that. I love that for you and for
Yeah.
us who get to enjoy the book. So the deal is one thing, but actually creating a cookbook is, I think, more complicated than I imagined until you started sending out all of your requests for recipe testers to a lot of us. How did you approach this? I mean, it's not actually a single ingredient cookbook, but it's this umbrella of this ingredient that marries it all together. And you really explored a lot of diversity in how you can use tahini and sesame seeds. But what actually went into, choosing your recipes, testing them, having faith to put it out in the world that people would be able to follow along?
Yeah, so first of all, just for the proposal part of it, if you are pitching a fiction book, you need to write your whole novel and then shop it around. And then if no one ever buys it, you've written a whole novel and it's just kind of there. With nonfiction, you don't have to do that. So what I had to do for this proposal was come up with a table of contents of all the ideas of recipes that I would probably put in the book. But as I tested them, if they weren't good, it was like, you're out. I'm not going to keep them anyway. But since they came to me about this book, it's not like I had all of these ideas. I had to come up with everything real fast because I only had, at first, 5 months was what they gave me to write the book. And then because my editor went on vacation, I got 6 months. But yeah, it wasn't like I had this hope chest of recipes. So what I did at first was I thought about every recipe that I already make with tahini or black sesame or sesame seeds and just wrote them down. Then I thought of kind of what I thought was logical substitutions, things that might have peanut butter in them, things that are creamy that I could use tahini as the agent to make it creamy instead of dairy. And then I just really would go to the grocery store and look at things differently. I just started really paying attention to the vegetables and the fruit, and I would watch Top Chef reruns and be like, oh, that's interesting. And I wasn't copying. It's just you get these ideas of like, oh, I wouldn't have thought to put that with that. So I started with the 45 recipes that I thought I was going to make. Then, like you said, testers are so important. So I messaged all of my type A home cook friends, of which there are some in this audience. I see Sue Mills right there. So many organized people in my life. And then when I would get a recipe to the point that I thought it was as far along as I could get it, as good as it gets, I would send it to one of these testers. And inevitably it would come back, with the red pen on it. And you're like, oh, okay. I mean, so important, like little things. I put bok choy in a recipe. It was supposed to be baby bok choy. Just for getting the word baby, she was like, there was a lot of bok choy in that recipe. So testers are a big part of catching things. And then, just over the time I had to write the book, I would think of new recipes and kind of kick an old one out and put a new one in. I think that's mostly the process.
This was a fun time to be your friend and coworker. We did a fair amount of working on the podcast in your apartment, and almost every time I came over, there's, oh, you need to try this. These are sesame waffles, or so it was a great time to be around you as you were testing all of these ways to use tahini. I'm curious though, what didn't make the cut, or were there any disasters or surprises as you were trying to figure out all the ways you wanted to use tahini and sesame?
Yes, there was this cake. It's in the book, but I don't know how it got in there. I hate waste. I'm sure a lot of people in this room feel the same way. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. I hate throwing things away, even if it's composting. And I was making this vanilla cake, and I wanted to make it a tahini vanilla cake. So I thought, I'll take out all of the oil or the butter, and I'll use tahini instead because there's so much oil in it. And I Googled, and it said, yes, that's the thing you should do. So I put it in the oven. It was supposed to take 25 minutes, and then an hour goes by, and an hour and a half, and it's still raw in the middle. And I finally took it out, and I was so sad about it, and I just could hear the death march in my head as I took it out to the compost and dumped it. I had to compost 2, 3, 4 of them in a row, and there's just a point where, you know, besides it's the time and it's the money, and I only had 6 months to write this book, and how many times can I just keep making this recipe? I finally got it with the help of a friend who's a home baker. All that it ended up being was, it was coconut oil. And she said, don't melt it, keep it solid, and it's gonna look really chunky, and it's gonna feel really weird, and it worked. But yeah, things like that where there's just kind of a lot of waste sometimes. And while I was creating my book, I was listening to food podcasts, and Melissa Clark, who's a prolific recipe developer, she writes for the New York Times, she has tons of cookbooks, she was talking about how she'll sometimes test a baked good 25 times. I was like, who has the time to do this? Another person was saying they spent a year on their donut recipe. So when you have a deadline, it's like, you gotta move it along. You know, if it's not working, I kind of had to let it go.
Make the cut pile.
Yeah.
And being your friend, you are known as the person that all leftovers go to. So I know it was painful for you to throw away any of that food. So I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you so much. Like right now, I made challah on Friday, and I have an egg wash. You know, there's like a quarter of an egg in my fridge right now. Because I just can't. I'm going to use it for something. I don't know what. There were funny things that I didn't anticipate doing as well. I used a measuring tape a lot when I was making this book, because once that book is in someone else's house, you don't know what people are going to do with your recipes. So you're trying as hard as you can to give the best instruction so that they can have success, because already people have different calibrated ovens. They're running on different heat. You know, the eggs are different sizes. The salt has different salinity if you're using different salt brands. So I was measuring cucumbers. Wow. And I was measuring carrots with this measuring tape. I didn't anticipate that I was going to be doing that.
I appreciated your specificity there, though. Like in the beginning of the book, you note that you used kosher salt for all of these recipes, which is a bigger grain. So you should, if you're using, you know, fine grain salt, you need to use half that amount. So yeah, this stuff matters in the end for people to get it right.
And I don't always read that in other people's books.
Read the beginning.
Yeah,
read the whole book.
Because this did happen. A friend had a little potluck where she sweetly said, "Everybody bring a recipe from the book." And a friend brought the deviled eggs and walked in. And she looked at me and said, "I ruined your recipe. What did you do?" She's, "It's so salty." And at first I was like, oh no, it's a bad recipe. But I made it the week before and it was good. And she'd said that she used Morton salt and I called for Diamond Crystal. And it was true. It was inedibly salty. It was doubly as salty.
I want to talk about the stated mission of this book, because I love it, because I really relate to it. I have an old jar of tahini on the shelf that I need to get rid of, and I think probably a lot of people have experienced that you make a recipe, then what? So this book, you say, is to help people actually finish a jar.
Yeah. I hear you out there. Has anyone in this room ever finished a whole jar of tahini?
Oh,
okay, there's some people, yeah. Is anybody out there have an old jar that you wish would just roll itself out of the house and into the dumpster so you don't have to do it? Yeah. And I was the same way. I was like you. Because, yeah, you would make hummus or like a salad dressing, and it's like, what am I going to do with this? And then it just moonwalks like Michael Jackson to the back of the fridge, and you feel guilty about it. So, yeah, that's kind of the hope for this book, is to use up the jar of tahini and maybe buy another one.
And it's way more versatile than I think I'd realized before reading your book. I mean, yeah, it was basically making hummus, making like a marinade to try and copy the PCC cauliflower recipe, maybe making like a cold noodle dish. But what are some of the things that you have fallen in love with, uses of tahini, that weren't on your like already best of list? What are some things you picked up from this process?
I love tahini in desserts, and sesame in general. There's also a really good black sesame. I call it a smoothie because it's somewhere between a milkshake and a smoothie. And that is, all that it is a banana, dates, black sesame, milk, and a little sea salt. And it's so good. The black sesame is very kind of like dark and brooding and earthy and smoky. It's so good. But yeah, just kind of in general in desserts, tahini is so good with chocolate. There's a few recipes where you just make a really simple tahini whipped cream, where you make homemade whipped cream and then you just fold the tahini into it, and that is between the chocolate miso whoopie pies, which is really good. There's a all sesame ice cream sundae in there where you can make a chocolate tahini magic shell, tahini whipped cream, and then these, I forget what I call them, like sesame crisp. Like, remember those little sesame candies that would come in the plastic wrapper? So good. It's like that, but you make a sheet and then you put this shard in your ice cream sundae. So yeah, I think even just pouring tahini on things, which I always felt before maybe you have to make a sauce or mix it in, but in the book, we pour it on waffles because it's so good with maple syrup. And pouring it on, there's a recipe for roasted strawberry toast that it's toast with a layer of goat cheese and then these roasted strawberries and some balsamic and tahini and mint and basil and sea salt. It's good.
Can't wait to try that one.
Yeah.
You brought up a recipe actually that I wanted to talk about because I love your love of food, but also I love your personality. You are a vibrant and one of my funniest friends. And you told me as we were sort of chatting about this that you were kind of surprised how much of yourself you were allowed to put into your book in like the headlines, the headers of the recipes. Can you tell us about the header for the whoopie pies?
Yes, I can. Since I was kind of recruited to write this book, I didn't know if they wanted my personality into it. Oh, thanks. It's not that I thought I was going to ghostwrite it, but since I didn't pitch it, I just thought I'll kind of be filling in the blanks and just writing these recipes. But then my editor was like, oh no, we want you in it. We want your personality in it, which is how the word fart got into my cookbook.
Every good cookbook.
I don't know how many others have that. So I'm going to read you, it's called the head note, is what they call the paragraph above the recipe. This is the chocolate miso whoopie pies that I mentioned earlier. And this is true. A fact I think about often, Whoopi Goldberg named herself after the whoopee cushion when she was repeatedly teased for passing gas on stage. A comforting fact, there are 0 farts in these whoopie pies. A third fact, whoopie pies aren't pies at all. They are tender little cakes, usually sandwiching buttercream or marshmallow fluff. These whoopie pies are filled with fluffy whipped cream, sweetened with maple, and flavored with nutty tahini. Turns out miso, chocolate, and tahini are a match made in dessert heaven. If you don't love a saccharine dessert, you'll appreciate the balance of salty miso and lightly sweetened cream.
Love it. Haven't gotten to try that one, but I hope to.
That is a good one. Also, there's a picture that there was only one thing I kind of had to fight for in this book. Otherwise, we were 100% on the same page. And it was for this picture. And that's the beet hummus. The photographers in this room, Brian Mills, took this picture because we kind of wanted just a little bit of silliness in this book. We had a mood board, and that included trying to give it some Amy Sedaris kind of vibes. And I was like, well, if we're going to do that, I have to have this.
Is that the actual hummus on your face?
It is. And I was advised just before I did it, luckily, to put Vaseline all over my face so that I didn't have a pink face for the next 2 weeks. Because I had like an event the next day and I was like, oh my God, you saved my life. I would have had a pink hummus face.
Good to know. But you can't speak to the effects of sesame on the skin then. We don't know if it's good for...
We don't know, but we know that Vaseline is a protectant agent.
Thank goodness.
A barrier.
So we're here at the SJCC, and you mentioned that your father is Israeli. You grew up in a Jewish family. Can you talk a little bit about how that might have influenced your food traditions or your relationship to the dinner table or food in general?
Yeah, and I do want to say before I talk about that, because it is a very sensitive issue, tahini and hummus are both fought over by many nations. Everybody kind of wants to claim it. So, there was a lot of countries who've been eating tahini for a very long time, hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Syria, Turkey, Egypt, Palestine, all of these places. And then, of course, when Israel became a state and people came from around the world looking for a new home, they adopted the local cuisine. So just to kind of give tribute to the countries that have been eating tahini and hummus for a long time. But I think most people who grow up with an immigrant at home, you just are kind of exposed to other foods that maybe your classmates aren't eating at school. If you grew up at the end of a cul-de-sac in a Bay Area suburb where everybody just seemed to be white and Christian, my mom would come every year, and like do a little Hanukkah lesson and make latkes. And I remember the mean girl at school. You always remember their name. Angela Berticelli, if you're out there.
Angela.
She came up to me at recess and said, what are you, like Hanukkah or something? But Yeah, I think just kind of my dad would eat things for breakfast that my friends thought were really gross. You know, he would eat like sardines on toast and roasted red pepper and eggplant spread and things that I was used to. But I think that compared to a lot of stories, I think these stories are very common now, like the stinky lunchbox stories you hear, especially I think from like a lot of Asian people living in America. I was always very proud of our food. I liked it and I thought it was cool. I don't know. I don't know why. I just remember thinking like, our food is really good. And I don't know if you don't know what it is, but like stinky fish for breakfast is pretty good. Yeah, like I said earlier, I think I was just exposed to a lot of different foods from a young age and always liked all the Jewish holiday food, all Ashkenazi. It wasn't until I moved to Seattle that I learned about Sephardic food, which has been really cool. I volunteered a few times making food for the big bazaar they do every year. Do you know about this?
I don't.
Have you been to the events? Yeah. And I remember, you know, they have these long plastic tables and they're rolling out 6 feet long of phyllo and you're making the boreka. So that has kind of been a nice continuing education of my Jewish food education living up here.
I love that. And you unlocked a memory of I grew up in a small cow town in Western Massachusetts. It was not a Jewish town, but being the one Jewish kid in kindergarten. No, Isaac, you will explain Hanukkah to everybody now. I'm like, oh, okay. Actually, I like the attention, but that's fine. This is not covered in your book, but since we're talking a little bit about like Jewish food and your relation to food, can you talk about your discovery of some foods that you didn't realize were Jewish coded? I'm thinking specifically of a dessert item. Tofutti cuties?
I was like, what is it? Okay, how many people in this room either grew up with or still eat tofutti cuties? Only one. Do you guys know what tofutti cuties? Oh, I can see a lot of hands. Okay. I didn't know that tofutti cuties were a Jewish food until I interviewed the comedian Moshe Kasher for my podcast a couple years ago. And he grew up kind of with a split. He lived half the year in Berkeley with his mom who was Jewish, but he didn't really live a Jewish life. And then he lived with his very religious family half the year or in the summer in New York. And that was the dessert that they always had was tofutti cuties because it's kosher. And in that moment, I was like, I ate tofutti cuties and we weren't kosher. That's crazy. And then I keep asking Jewish people and everyone's eating tofutti cuties. And I didn't know it was a company that was started by a Jewish guy for this reason, so that you could have a kosher dessert. But they have since totally rebranded the box.
You have thoughts about the branding.
I do. They have totally stripped all the Jewishness away from tofutti cuties. They changed the box. And when I wanted to interview the company for my podcast, they specifically said that they are declining the interview because they don't want to talk about the Jewish connection, which I was very disappointed by.
Wow.
Yeah. But the thing I thought you were talking about is latkes I think of as just being a Jewish food. But again, this is why I get to learn from my own podcast on Your Last Meal. If you haven't listened, I interview celebrities about their last meals, and then I bring on other guests to talk about the culture or the science or the history of that food. And Maria Sharapova, the tennis player, was a guest on the show, and her last meal was latkes, but she has a different name for it that I can't think of right now. That's the Russian name. Someone in this room probably knows.
A potato pancake in any language.
In any language. And basically, you know, that's a really common food in Russia and Ukraine as well. But it was like when those immigrants came to the US, they brought it with them. So it became a Jewish food because it was only Jewish people making it. So there's a few examples of that beyond the cuties.
I love that.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about your podcast because this is like an important part in the journey of, you know, being a journalist, being passionate about food and creating your own show. Can you just tell us a story or two of like some of your favorite guests and just like vibrant moments? I love the podcast. I got to work on it, so I'm biased. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about your last meal.
Yeah. Favorite guest? Well, Isaac Mizrahi always is at the top of the list.
Who wrote the foreword?
Who wrote the foreword to the book? I don't know. Has anybody read the foreword yet? Because actually, I want to just read this little part because he is so funny. If you're not familiar, Isaac Mizrahi is a fashion designer. He's also a performer and an author himself. And I met him because I had him on the podcast. And we were doing a Zoom interview. I don't remember if it was during COVID or before, but no, it was before. There are, most people that I interview, it is an interview. You know, it's like I ask a question and then they answer. But then there's people who really want to have a conversation. And those are the curious people. And those are the most fun people. And Isaac Mizrahi is one of those people. And we really hit it off. And then a few months later, I got an email from his assistant. And she said, is there any chance you'll be in New York soon? Isaac wants you to come over to his apartment and cook with him. Once I got the smelling salts and scrape myself off the floor, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna happen to be in New York. Of course I'm gonna go. So we became friendly, and he is so funny. So I'm just gonna read part of the introduction, or the foreword that he wrote, because it's so very Isaac. I'm gonna skip the beginning. How we met. When she said she was working on a cookbook, I sighed and hoped for the best. As a jaded cookbook collector of 40 years, I was preparing for the worst and began assembling praiseful phrases that wouldn't let on how bored I was at the prospect of another cookbook trying to reinvent pub food or exaggerate the creature comforts of their childhood food memories. But then, this slightly insane book about sesame and tahini arrived, and I was truly surprised. And on he goes, but so Isaac. He is one of my favorites. But yeah, I think surprise is a big element. I think we all do this. When you see someone on the street, you kind of form an opinion, or when you first meet someone. And I've done that for a lot of my guests before I've spoken to them. I've had this idea of what kind of guest they were going to be, based on probably characters I've seen them play or whatever I've read in the tabloids. And I'm often very wrong. People who I thought might not have much to say have a lot to say, are very deep. A lot of people who are, very funny and very engaging. So I guess that's my after school special message. It's don't judge a book by its cover. William Shatner was another one that was like Isaac Mizrahi. He was extremely funny and very weird. And at the time, I think 89 years old, would only do it over the phone, which is not good quality, but that made it so his assistant couldn't be on the line, and I'm pretty sure they would have pulled the call if they heard what he was saying. He's like, you know what? I want to make a TV show called MILF. And I was like,
wow, William.
What's that about? And he goes, what do you mean, what is it about? Moms I'd like to feed. Feeding dogs that are moms, feeding human moms. And I was like, oh, of course.
Still weird.
MILF. Okay. Yeah, so he told me a story about what his dog liked to eat when she was in heat. I mean, this is what we're after, ladies and gentlemen.
I think what you've unlocked is the power of food as a vehicle for storytelling, both in your book, in your show, and in your career. And this is also how we met, is storytelling and food in a number of different ways. Can you talk a little bit about your living your dreams, your journey from, being a journalist and now being a full-time food person?
Yeah. This was my dream for a very long time. For 15, maybe even 20 years, I always wanted to only be in food media. I started as a news reporter in 2002. I ended up doing it for 20 years, and little things would come my way that I thought, this is it. I'm going to be able to just do this now. I've been food writing since 2001, 2002, so I was always doing something on the side. I was a freelance food writer for many years, but you can't make very much money doing that. At least I couldn't at the time. Even though I had a column in Seattle Weekly, I think they paid me $50 a column, and that was twice a month. You can't really pay the bills. I would judge. When I was at Cairo, I would get asked to judge a chowder contest, and I was like, yeah, anything. I would do anything to try to do it. And I would get these, like I said, excited that I would get asked to do a thing, and I would think, I'll meet the right person, and then this will turn into a career, but it just never did. So the fact that I'm doing this now is amazing to me. It's part hard work, but it's also luck. So I started doing my podcast at Cairo almost 9 years ago, I think this August. And when I left Cairo, I was very lucky to be able to leave with the show and joined Cascade PBS. They gave me this really weird deal where they were like, well, if you come over with the podcast, you also have to host a TV show about food. And I was like, oh, okay. This show pony? And I got to develop the whole thing. And then as soon as I left Cairo, 3 months later, I got offered the book deal. So I just feel like I have to walk a lot of old ladies across the street because my karma is just been used up. But it is kind of just the value of saying yes. I said yes to everything that I wanted to do. I did a lot of things on the side. I would MC events and, like I said, the food writing. So I think you just have to keep saying yes, and hopefully it'll turn into something.
I have to advocate for you a little bit more, though, because you say luck, and I think you negate your passion and your talent. I mean, like, working on the podcast with you, I saw what a passion project that was. Like, you dedicated your time and resources outside of your main jobby job thing, and you kept it going because I think you really knew that you had something and continued to grow it. So not just luck, you're great at what you do.
Thank
so
you.
I just want to acknowledge that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well deserved. We talked about some of the different uses of tahini and sesame in the book, and they are wide and varied. And you talked about the origins of tahini specifically sort of in the Levant region, but sesame seeds are a fairly international ingredient. I actually came across them being grown in India when I was a 20-year-old backpacking. And desert regions, they take very little water to grow. Asian cuisine, Chinese cuisine uses a lot of sesame seeds. Any surprise uses or country or cuisine specific uses of sesame seeds that were outside of your normal experience that you came across? I mean, we talked sweet and savory, but... Yeah.
Actually, could you talk first? Because we were on a walk and you were telling me about how they grew the sesame seeds where you were in India. I thought it was really interesting. Could you talk about it a little bit?
So this was on an eco-village in southern India, and they were doing like very minimally invasive farming practices. So I don't know if this is true for industrial scale sesame seeds, but they described them as a dew crop, which meant that they don't have to be actively watered, just the dew point would leave enough moisture. And they don't look like this delicious plant that you want to eat. They're like spindly with these arms sticking off and these kind of pea pod looking things that are just packed with the sesame seeds inside. So I always thought it was really cool that desert regions could potentially grow this like very nutrient rich and delicious food source without actively watering. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, I thought that was so interesting that they didn't water it. And when you said dew point, I thought at first it was D-O. It was like a can-do spirit.
Yeah. Sesame seed, humble little sesame seed.
Yeah. I don't know if I learned, a ton that I didn't know from other cultures, but I just made my own stuff up and crammed it into other cultures. I think that's kind of what I learned was like, oh, this flavor tastes good with a lot of different foods. So there's khichdi in the book, which is one of my favorite dishes. It's a really comforting Ayurvedic Indian meal where you long cook, what are they? They're cracked mung beans. That they look like yellow lentils with rice until it's a porridge. And then, there's like a cilantro tahini sauce. You can make it a million different ways. That was my interpretation. There's a nacho recipe that is more of like a Middle Eastern take. So you make homemade pita chips and you dust them with sumac, and then you make shawarma, chicken shawarma, that's the meat, and then there's a tahini feta queso, and then you do kind of like an Israeli salad, like the cucumbers and the tomatoes, and you sprinkle that on top.
Which actually, sorry to jump in, but we made this queso recently, some friends of mine, and I was skeptical because I have a specific idea of what queso is, right?
Yeah.
And like tahini, okay, queso, and it was cold. It's so good. The roasted potatoes with the tahini queso is like delicious. And I think that it reminded me that tahini brings like an earthiness and a rich umami. And it's also a kind of, I don't know if it's actually an emulsifier, but it adds like a real creaminess to a sauce. So you got really creative, and I love that recipe. I recommend it.
Thank you. I warned specifically in the book that it's cold because I just wanted people to have the expectation that, not to think it's going to be like a hot queso. You have to warn people like this. Every therapist will tell you, create expectations, What was something you just said that reminded me? Oh yeah, the creaminess. That's something I think that I feel like this mission just to make sure people know how to kind of use the tahini properly, because like I said earlier, it can get really clumpy. One thing that's really easy to do, if that's the case, if it's not super old, you can smell it, first of all. Like, how peanut butter gets that weird smell when it goes off? Same with tahini. But just scrape it all into a little food processor and just blitz it and pour it back in the jar. And it's so satisfying to have it be so smooth again. If you're using tahini to make a dressing or for hummus, its best friend is cold water. That's what will loosen it up. Like, you don't need to put oil, just like a little cold water at a time, and you'll just... Again, it's very satisfying to watch it just get, very smooth and silky. So it's kind of easy solutions, but it's like you have to know to know.
The cold water thing was really helpful to me because I'd been making my sesame noodle sauces with hot water, and it would always kind of bind up and not do what I wanted. So that was a very useful tip.
Honestly, I don't know the science behind it. I should probably look into it. I don't know why, but
works.
the cold water works. It works. Like some people even put an ice cube into their hummus, and then it gets nice and fluffy. And I think part of it is the cold water in the ice cube. Yeah.
We're almost towards our Q&A portion of this, but you've been doing this book tour. You worked so hard to put this awesome book out into the world. As the last person who gets to interview on this tour so far.
You guys, I've been touring all around Seattle, and here I am in Mercer
schedule,
Island.
right?
Yeah.
All over, pack your bags.
And Portland.
What question have you been hoping someone would ask you about this book that no one has yet dared to ask?
I don't know. Do you have one?
I wanted to ask you if you're
that.
sick of tahini and sesame at this point. I mean, it was like 5-6 months of your life where if you were cooking at home without something else in mind, you were cooking these recipes. Do you still like it?
I do. I know. I was surprised. I think it's like, sharing a cabin with someone for 6 months, and it's like, do we still like each other? I still like tahini. Although I think that was the only thing, and I'm not saying I was put upon at all, but it was this period of 6 months where since I had to create recipes so quickly and test them, I didn't really get to choose what I wanted to eat on a daily basis. So it was like, I'm eating tahini today, and I'm going to be eating this because this is the recipe. So I think when I was done with the 6 months, I did take a little break so I could just choose what I wanted to eat. But it wasn't so bad. I mean, it's pretty good. Yeah, there's also sesame oil, so it wasn't only tahini. Like, there's a really good recipe for poke in the book. The black sesame, like I said. There's a recipe for sesame encrusted waffles, which is pretty fun. This was a fun thing that came to me. Like, I woke up in the morning and was like, oh! If you just pour a lot of sesame seeds into the waffle iron, and then you pour the batter and then more on top, it just completely encrusts it. And so it's like very toasty and like crunchy and warm. I thought that was really good.
I love it. And I love sesame seeds. I love that you've dedicated all this time and effort to it.
Yeah.
I think we're going to move now to questions from the audience.
Yeah, we're going to turn up the lights just a tiny bit, but we've got some questions. But I want to start with the first question, if I can take the privilege. Rachel, what's your last meal?
My last meal. It's not kosher, so brace yourself. My last meal, and this has changed, but since I've lived in Washington, this is my 20th year living here, it's raw oysters. I love raw oysters. I don't know if any of you remember, they don't do it anymore. There was an event, it's separate from the restaurant with this name, called the Walrus and the Carpenter, I think they called it Walrus and Carpenter Picnic, where you would pay. They would pick you up in these minivans and they would take you out to the coast, and it was night and they had spotlights on the beach, and as you got out of the van they would hand you an oyster shucker, and then you just got to pick whatever you wanted off the beach, shuck it yourself. They had, I think, 1 or 2 wines that were perfectly matched. They didn't have any kind of accoutrement, like little, what is that word I'm trying to think of that starts with an M that you... Not marionette. Mignonette. No puppets either. Creepy. So I really developed a taste for just raw oysters without anything on them. And I would like to shuck my own off of a beach. I also would like a perfect grilled cheese sandwich that's like really gooey and melty on the inside, like the old Kraft commercial from the 80s, and really crispy and crunchy on the outside with a matchless IPA with both of those things.
Would you create this perfect grilled cheese on the beach? Because I know that you love like camping cooking is another passion, something you brought into the Nosh.
Yeah.
New episodes coming out in April on
Thank you.
Cascade PBS. But yeah,
I never thought about that, but
beachside?
yes, I did. I made a grilled cheese on a hike just before winter started. So yeah, I think I might do that. I was testing a recipe because I am working on a proposal for hopefully my next book, which will be all about outdoor cooking, hiking, van camping, tent camping. And I thought, I'm going to combine tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. And it didn't work when I tried, so I have to keep working on that. I thought that I had this genius idea to make a roasted tomato butter and then spread that on the bread, but the tomatoes were too wet and it made it so soggy. That's not going to be in the book. But yeah, what's your last meal?
Man, I thought about this a lot because I worked on dozens of episodes with you, and the answer changes every time.
Yeah.
In this context, I do think I would start with an oyster, but I would not shuck it myself. but it would
Could
be...
I do it?
Sure.
Okay.
And it would be a West Coast oyster, even though I'm from the East Coast. I really prefer our salinity out here. And then I would have, I think, like a green salad with a shallot, just like a really kind of bright dressing. And I would want to sneak a stinky cheese course in there, even though it's fancier to do it at the end. And then probably like, this is a kiss-ass answer for this context, but my mother's brisket. It's like one of the, she doesn't love cooking, but it's one of the things that she makes really, really well. So I think, although this sort of presupposes that I die before her so that she could make the brisket for my last meal.
This is a fantasy.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want.
In this fantasy, at least that recipe exists forever, regardless of who's alive or not. And I'm not really a dessert person, but if I were twist my arm, probably like a lemon tart or something like. I like tartness with my sweet.
We could die together. Our last meals are pretty close.
Good. And I've never heard you say that oyster answer before. I've got a guy. He delivers them for $1 an oyster. We're going to do oysters together. And we have to shuck them ourselves. So, yes, in Seattle.
That's good. Okay, see him after if you want the name of his guy.
I'm going to walk around. Folks that want to ask questions, pick up your hand. But I did not know that tahini also, 2 tablespoons, has 130 grams of calcium in it.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
No, and so it's the good fat, right? But anyhow, who's got a question for Rachel? Okay, 1 table here, 2 people. Awesome.
Thank you for coming out here. Really loved hearing from you.
Thank you for coming out here.
So, tahina. You buy a jar of it, you open it up. It's got like 2/3 of pure oil on top, and on the bottom is this thick sludge that's stuck hard to the jar. Yeah. It takes a huge amount of elbow grease to mix it up, plus it goes flying everywhere, or you can goop up a food processor. Yeah. What's the best way to get it mixed up?
I think you throw it in the garbage and you just mix it up in there. No, I think that's another kind of tip when you're buying it is look for ones that don't have so much oil. Like, of course they all do. I don't know. I'm looking at this. Like, when you see the Soom, it doesn't have as many inches. So I think that's part of picking it is to pick a jar that doesn't look like it's a quarter oil. But honestly, yeah, beyond putting it in the food processor, I think there's nothing else you could do if you're either doing the elbow grease.
Maybe like a hand mixer, hand blender?
If you can get it in there. Oh my God. He said it's an electric drill that you can bolt onto the jar.
That's commitment.
There was, what's that? Store it upside down. But then doesn't the oil go to the other new top? It does help. Okay. I did see a tool once at this cooking store in Ballard that's not there anymore for peanut butter where it was, is that what you're thinking of? It had it was a new
like
lid and then inside it had like a stirring mechanism so you could close it and stir it around. But I haven't seen it since.
This is like, the struggle is kind of real. Like I grew up on only natural peanut butter, like nothing hydrogenated.
Adams.
But secretly like peanut butter that you can just use without the stir. The stir is annoying, but I guess it's worth it. And you're going to be using so much, it won't settle as much.
Yeah, you're going to use it so fast. Okay, we have someone who's vouching for the
stirrer.
What is it called? What would you search? Peanut butter stirrer. Okay. Okay. See her after the show for peanut butter lids. She got a guy. I agree, but I won't publicly say that on the stage.
Hello. Hi, so I have a question, but I also have an answer to the previous question.
Yeah.
That I learned from a friend of mine who is a chemist, a Chinese friend of mine, who said, I was like, oh, I got to stir this. She said, give me a pair of chopsticks.
Oh.
It works like a charm.
Oh, like a thinner implement is easier to get through, maybe?
It works like
Both
a charm.
of them?
Like nothing else. 2 chopsticks.
Smushed together?
You use them together,
Okay.
hold them together, and that it works like a charm. I've been doing it for years now.
I love this room's going to turn into
Thank
a
you,
women's
Gia.
magazine. It's like, who's got tips to get tahini out of your collar? You know?
Yeah, she also told me that the process that when you add liquid to the tahini, it gets thinner and then it gets much thicker.
Yeah.
And then you have to add, there's a name for that, which I don't know. But there's a name for it in case you ever wanted to know.
Okay.
Is there a name for this? Yes. And if you know a Chinese chemist, she could probably tell you. Okay.
I guess it's the idea of like things have to get worse before they get better.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh my God, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, my question, I noticed in here that you have a list of your favorite tahinis.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of obsessed with this particular topic, and I wondered why all ours tahini did not make your list.
All ours.
All ours.
It just might not be a tahini that I've crossed paths with.
Okay.
You know, I only know what I know. What does the label look like?
I don't know.
Or
I'll
what
look it
makes
up.
it great is if it's your
it's kind of
favorite.
oval. You can get it on Amazon. I have
Okay.
never. It's so Harbacha and all ours in Israel. I've had conversations with many Israelis, and they feel very passionately about one or the other.
Okay.
And all ours also makes a whole sesame tahini, which is much darker and nuttier.
That's
Anyway.
probably why, because I try not to order from Amazon. And so a lot of the ones that I have bought, I can find it in other places.
find it in other places.
Even Harbacha, I try to buy on a different website. But
Okay.
now I'll try that one.
Okay.
And I'll put in a quick tip, which you all probably know already, but my wife is Egyptian, and there are really great Middle Eastern markets up and down.
Goodies up
90
on
Goodies.
Aurora.
Goodies is a favorite of ours. So yeah, if you're looking for ingredients and don't want to order online, there's a lot of really good
Yeah.
Middle Eastern markets.
I will
in the
say,
area.
like, one of the ones on here that I think it's an Israeli brand, I get it at Fred Meyer. There's one that I've gotten at Town and Country in Ballard. So you can find them. You just have to keep looking. I mean, I go to the Jewish section in every supermarket, even if I don't need anything, because I'm like, cool, you're still there. I gotta
there
go
more
check
than
on.
Manischewitz today?
Yes, I know. I feel like I'm checking. I'm like, oh, hey, girl. Okay, everything's fine. I'll leave now. But yeah, it's worth going because some different stores have different brands. Usually, there's like there's the one brand that's not my favorite. I won't name it, but if it's not in this book. You won't see it. Hi.
Hello. I have a question. Do you have any opinions about the Jewish Holy Trinity of tahini, hummus, and falafel?
I mean, my opinion is it's good. I like it. I'm not sure. I mean, like, what? Be more specific.
Well, just do you cover falafel and I think you have hummus recipes for sure, but falafel as well.
Yeah, I didn't put falafel in the book. I was trying not to do too many just straightforward Middle Eastern recipes. I was trying to diversify, and because it's not technically like a Middle Eastern cookbook. I mean, the hummus was really important to me because it took me years to get it right, and I really wanted to put those recipes in because I think that my goal is for people to never buy it again because I have not found a brand that I like, and it's so easy to make it. I didn't put falafel in the book, but there is the classic garlicky tahini sauce in the book that you would put on falafel, and I say in the head note, this page should get stained. Like, this should be the recipe that you're using a lot because you can put this on everything. Roasted vegetables, it's what you'd put on falafel. My opinion on falafel is I like it to be really green inside. That's my favorite when there's a ton of parsley because that's kind of how I grew up with it, and I think it tastes better, and it seems to be more moist.
And you didn't ask me, but my opinion on falafel is that the Egyptian version, tamea, is superior. It's made with fava beans, not garbanzo. And garbanzo beans are like okay, chickpeas are like okay to me, but the fava beans are lighter, more flavorful. It's also probably because I was with my wife and her Egyptian family on the streets of Cairo, so of course it tasted better. But I don't know, falafel gets kind of dry and compacted too many places here. Make it yourself. It's really good.
You'd have to be a fool to prefer those beans.
Love it. Fool Medemus.
Yeah. We're partners in pun, too.
Hi, Rachel. It's Donna Blankenship.
Hi, Donna.
Hi. What's your favorite potluck dish, either from the book or from something else?
Ooh, that's a good. So if I'm transporting it somewhere, potluck dish. Okay. There's a dish in the book that I specifically wrote as a potluck dish because I think that it gets better as it sits, and that is kind of the classic soba noodle salad with, like a sesame soy dressing. It just tastes better when it's been sitting longer. I changed it from the classic, which I love it, just kind of plain with the sauce and scallions on top and sesame seeds. But I wrote a lot of this book in the summer, and so I was influenced by summer produce. And anyone who's had a garden knows that zucchini, there's so many of them. So mine is like an effort to try to help you get through all of your zucchini. So there's sauteed zucchini in there. That's a good one from the book. I will say the chocolate miso whoopie pies with tahini whipped cream, just because it seems like people really like them. And if you're competitive and you go to a potluck and you want your stuff gone, bring those. Ooh, another one is the falafel spice tahini deviled eggs with crispy chickpeas. That's the closest to falafel that's in the book. So I took all of the spices that you would normally use, like cumin, I'm blanking on, coriander, all of that is in the mix. And if you don't like mayonnaise, it's Greek yogurt instead. There are crispy chickpeas that I caught my cat with her head in the bowl, so I feel like that's a good sign.
She has good taste.
She also has a little dreidel. She's a little Jewish cat. But I feel like at potlucks, deviled eggs and pigs in a blanket seem to go first. So that's a pretty good potluck item as well.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Naomi,
Hi.
fellow daughter of immigrants who grew up with a lot of different exotic foods.
Where's your family from?
Vienna, Czechoslovakia, Israel.
Okay.
Combo. So I'm wondering about your experience with black sesame paste.
Yeah.
As in desserts. I haven't had a chance to go through your book thoroughly. If you have anything in that vein, but I wondered if you worked with it because I attempted a cake once and I didn't have authentic Japanese sesame paste, and I tried to make it myself, and it was like black tar all over my kitchen.
Yeah.
It was horrible. So then I got smart and I ordered off of Amazon black
It's
sesame
okay. I forgive
paste
you,
that
my child.
truly came from Japan. But I'm wondering, because it's such a wonderful thing in dessert.
Yeah. Okay. Honestly, I only have one black sesame recipe in here, and this all comes back to, again, the time I had to write this book. I've kind of had this idea of when I've cooked from books and the recipes don't work, I now understand, they had a short timeline. And I didn't want to, I bake, but I don't know a ton about the science of baking, to be completely honest, and I didn't have time to learn everything. So it was one of those things where I was already like really trying with the other baked things, and I just felt like I couldn't add another one in because it was gonna take me too much time. So yeah, there's only one black sesame. All I can say is that I also really love it. I would say that just in simplicity, just like making the tahini whipped cream, you could do the same thing with the black sesame and fold it into whipped cream and then use that in kind of whatever you're making, whether it's like topping chocolate mousse or, with ice cream. I know that black sesame ice cream is really good, but a lot of people kept saying, is there a recipe in the book for making your own tahini? And like you answer that question. No, like it's not worth it, and it's not going to be as good. Like if you go and you buy brands and the brands of tahini aren't as good, I just don't think that I can make a better one, because all that tahini is roasted sesame seeds. There shouldn't be anything else. Salt.
Yeah, you say don't use brands that have salt in it.
Yeah, if you want to control the salinity. I think one of the brands I recommend has salt, and I like it, but it should just be the roasted sesame seeds. So that depends on getting a really good quality seed, getting the perfect roast, and I feel like the odds of someone at home doing that, it's going to take a lot of trying.
I have a quick question, and then we have time for maybe another 2 or 3 questions, so raise your hand real high. We've got next one here. Rachel, I'm curious, when you go to Jerusalem and you go to the market, now the big thing is to see the big wheel pushing all the tahini out and flavored tahinis all over the walls, right? So you can have strange flavors, peanut butter, everything. I'm just curious about the phenomenon of tourism tahini.
I haven't been to Israel since 2001, so you'll have to tell me on my birthright trip. I haven't been able to go back since. Wait, what other flavors do they have?
Oh my gosh, Deb helped me out when we were in Jerusalem. I can't remember, but there was, every flavor under the sun that would candify, tahini on the walls, if those of you who have bought it. But that's sort of a fad that seems to be happening in the markets. Similarly with, fruits that you can buy to make teas and mixtures and things like that. But I've never seen that cross over anywhere else, these flavored tahinis that you could pick up.
Well, in the book, there are a few variations, mostly using herbs. So, you can make like a really delicious green tahini sauce, just making the classic garlic and just blend in other herbs that you like. You can do like cilantro, you could do mint, and that is really good. I think, you could easily do things like, what's the word I'm trying to think of? The lemons that sit in the salt for preserved lemons. That would be really good. I think, you could take yourself on your own tahini tour. I think it is a little bit of a blank canvas. I'm sure it would be really good with like Castelveltrano olives, because for the recipe you mentioned with the the potatoes with the tahini feta. There's also like a little Castelvetrano olive herb salsa. You could probably mix that in. Yeah, I think you could just try whatever you want at home. The beets, like what you're trying, also we do a golden one. I don't think that you guys are trying. Maybe you are. That has turmeric in it. So yeah, it's a little bit of a blank canvas.
And those sort of flavored tahini things make me think of the oil shops that pop up in a lot of tourist towns. I don't know if you feel the same way as I do, but like if you have a good ingredient, you don't want it flavored. You want to be able to flavor it yourself. You don't need a whole bottle of lemon flavored oil. Just add some lemon as you're making a recipe.
Like the stuff that ends up at like TJ Maxx
Yes,
in the cool bottle. Yeah.
Ross, yeah.
Yeah. I get all my tahini at Ross.
I love it. Like when Yotam Ottolenghi was here, you know, the phrase Ottolengify had kind of came out and everybody used it. So I guess we're Bellifying the tahini.
Let's Bellify it. Love Ottolenghi, but I think Ottolengify means 37 ingredients and like 65 sauces.
Well, welcome to the Belle epoch.
I love it.
So I was just wondering what the wonderful looking recipe or a dish on the cover of the book is and how it got there.
And doing a cover is its whole other story because Sasquatch is an imprint of Penguin Random House, and they kind of stay out of everything. We did everything locally except the cover. They get to make one of the final decisions, and so it was really kind of stressful. Oh, speaking of stressful. Okay, wait, hold on. Let me go to the page. So go to page. This is like insider gossip. Go to page 75, and there's a picture. It's this same recipe, but it is all of those same vegetables kind of splayed out in a more abstract way. And we actually wanted a version of this to be the cover, and they sent notes back from Penguin Random House that I got to see, and one woman said, "Gives me anxiety." And another person said, "Makes me angry." And I was like, you're going to have a hard time in the world if like this is stressing you out. Like, I'm really sorry. So yeah, this recipe is on page, I think it's 73. Then it's the rainbow farro bowls with herby tahini sauce. And it's a bunch of roasted vegetables with the sauce I was kind of just talking about, that herby tahini. But there's a couple of vegetable preparations that I love that I feel like are a little less common. Roasted radishes are a part of this. If you've never roasted radishes, oh my God, they're so good. They lose their spiciness and they get really creamy. There's also roasted red cabbage, which gets very sweet and gets really nice and crispy and brown around the edges. And farro is so nice and chewy. Yeah, it's a really nice, colorful, healthy recipe, but it's deceptively, it takes a little longer than you would think because there's a lot of components. You're doing a lot of multitasking, like you're doing the 7-minute eggs and you're roasting the vegetables and you're making the farro and you're blitzing the sauce. But what I do is I make a bunch and I kind of eat this for lunch all week.
Hi, Rachel. My name's Lisa. I'm over here.
Hey, girl.
Hi, I've been listening to you for so many years, so I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you.
I was wondering, of the 40, I know you have 45 recipes in there. Are there any that you wanted to put in that didn't make the cut?
There's one that my editor is upset that didn't make it in, that I never even tested. I put it into the proposal, and every time I looked at it, it made me tired. And I thought, well, if I'm tired looking at it, I don't know if anybody else wants it. So I'll tell you what it is. But we actually make it a plan, and in mid-October, she's demanding that we get together and make this recipe. It's a tahini bechamel lasagna, and the meat is Middle Eastern spiced. So it kind of almost like a pasticcio, but a lasagna form, but with tahini bechamel. I'm sure it's gonna be good. It just sounded like too many steps. I tried to balance making things that were more projects and then making things that were easier because I really wanted people to cook from it. I'm always curious to know what people make because there's things in there that are a little more project-y and I wonder, will anyone make that? So I wanted to have simpler things.
You kind of have the mother sauces in this book that are tahini based. So like that kind of green goddessy type dressing for this, or the garlic tahini, or the hummus. So people, even if you don't make a homemade whoopie pie, you can enjoy tahini whipped cream.
Yeah, and then there's the one that's kind of more of a project that I want to show you, because this one, did anyone listen to Unorthodox podcast before they canceled it? I loved that show so much. And I heard Liel mention this sandwich. They call it a Shabbat sandwich because it's made with challah, and it's sesame crusted chicken schnitzel on soft challah with matbucha, which is this really delicious Moroccan red pepper spread. And then there's the garlicky tahini sauce, and you get a can of the Israeli pickles. Oh my God, it is so good. But it's a little bit of a project. So this is something that I hope people will make, because one of my testers who did a lot of testing said it was the best thing in the book, but it does have a lot of components.
Do we have any last questions, folks? Okay, I just want to make mention that we are going to be selling some more books up here. We have some hummus, which is not easy to find in Seattle, because I also am not an Amazon person.
They sell it at Whole Foods now.
They sell it at Whole Foods,
yeah.
and I believe that Book Larder sells it as well. But I was going to say, please join us. Rachel will be signing books in just a moment. I have one final question, and then I'll hand it over to Isaac if there's anything to wrap up. I just want to say, like, so much about cookbooks and the people that we present who write books, their photos, tell us something really deep about their story. And I'm just wondering for you, Rachel, when we first met each other, it was often Rachel in a really cute dress in front of a food truck. And I'm just wondering the transition to this cookbook. What is this cookbook saying about Rachel Belle these days?
The best compliment that I've gotten about this book is so you. That is really the best compliment I've gotten. And to me, it's colorful, it's fun, it explores a lot of different cultures and love for food. And I just think that, like, I love the design work that they did on it. I know this is like a little bit different than maybe what you're asking me, but I don't know. That's a hard question. That's probably something I should talk about in therapy to figure out who I am in relation to this book. But I think for me, just the process of making it was so enjoyable. I don't know about you, there's a lot of people who are creatives and artists who make all kinds of things. And my whole life, I've found it a little bit hard to find a solid creative partner. You know, you can find somebody and you have the same taste, but maybe different work ethic, or vice versa, or you don't have the same taste, but you really like their personality. And making this book with Sasquatch was a big project, and it gelled completely. From the very beginning, we all just had the same idea of what we wanted, like with the mood board and the colors, and we just liked each other so much, and it was so fun, and it was so fun to write. So I think for me, I guess all I can say is I'm just very proud of it. I enjoyed it so much that I hope that the happiness that I felt making it comes through when you read it and cook from it.
Well, let's give you one big round of applause for that. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Isaac, I'll pass it over to you, and I want to thank you so much for bringing your relationship with Rachel to the stage and having so much insight into the book. So thank you also, Isaac. Give Isaac a big round of applause as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you to SJCC for hosting us. I just want to give a shout out to Rachel overall as a cool person and an amazing follow. If you're curious about this camping cooking thing, like her Instagram, if you haven't left that platform, is a really great follow. The podcast is wonderful, so definitely subscribe to Your Last Meal. Check out The Nosh in April when new episodes are released, or you can find back episodes on Cascade PBS. And yeah, Rachel, this is a great cookbook. So Sesame, and so says a you after you've read it. Thank you all.
Oh my God.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much.